Shabbat shalom, everybody. So, when thinking of a title for the sermon this morning, because the topic was suggested to me by a prominent member of the board, so when thinking of a title, I wanted something that would catch the attention. And therefore I put, should willful refusal of COVID-19 vaccinations exclude one from the Jewish community? I wanted one that would really sort of provoke maybe some thought and some response. Well, I was certainly successful in that. Got some very interesting response, and I found them all very, very interesting to read. One of them in particular wrote with such indignation that I found it a little comical, because sometimes what appears or what we feel is the correct and moral, ethical thing to do actually turns out to be the opposite. But yet people feel that without having to go any further, they have this indignation in their thought and in their beliefs. So it was quite interesting. What I'm trying to get people to understand is that there is a moral imperative in how we live it as a community. If you look at Israel, Israel is leading the way in showing the world what a post-COVID reality can look like. With over 80% of the eligible population, those over 16, vaccinated, life is very much returning to normal. Elizabeth and I were speaking to my aunt who lives in Kedumim, and they're like, they can't get over how slow we are behind them. They're like, everything was open, they have people for Shabbos, and it's like normal. Kids are fully back to school, shopping centers are bustling, restaurants are open for indoor dining. Tourists will soon be welcomed in groups. Israel now regularly has days with no deaths from COVID at all. And the case count is the lowest it's been since the pandemic started. The key to Israel's reopening is vaccinations. And to take advantage of many of these benefits, such as dining indoors, you must have what is called a Tav Yarok. Remember that name, Tav Yarok, because Tav Yarok sounds much nicer than saying green passport. In other words, certification from the Ministry of Health that you have either been vaccinated or have recovered from COVID in the last few months. This is how Israel is getting the case count way down. Other countries, including Canada, are looking at the Israeli example of the Tav Yarok and wondering whether or how they can emulate it. The EU has announced that it plans to institute a Tav Yarok, a green passport program, literally to be used as a passport to allow travel to and from the EU. And in some countries, it stirs up big debate. Is it fair to exclude people who haven't been vaccinated? Israel didn't institute the Tav Yarok, the green passport model, until after everyone over the age of 16 was made eligible for the vaccine. At this point, anyone in Israel who isn't vaccinated because they chose not to get vaccinated. And there are vaccines available for everyone, and there is no shortage of appointments. Some might argue it's still not fair. It's discriminatory to say that only people who have been vaccinated get to have a normal life. And what if you don't want to get vaccinated because you don't trust the vaccine? Or because you have some kind of health problem that precludes you from the vaccination, or the vaccination is inadvisable for you, or it won't work for you. You know, in the Parsha, the Torah reading that we read a few weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Tazriah, we were told what they did with people who could be a danger to others during the days of the Torah. They were put outside of the camp. The Metzorah, who was a person who was afflicted with this sort of leprosy-like disease, was not allowed to dwell inside the camp. And neither were others who had forms of spiritual impurity deemed dangerous to the community. In this week's parasha, which was read so beautifully this morning, Emor, a blasphemer is taken outside the camp prior to his being stoned to death. And in the heart of the for those of you who have been to Jerusalem, I just want to ask you, have you ever been to the German colony? Oh, yeah, so you know. Okay, good. So in the heart of the upscale German colony neighborhood of Jerusalem, there is a place called Beit Hansen. Anybody been there? I'm sure you have. If you went to the German colony, you went to Beit Hansen, which was originally built as a leper colony in the late 19th century. It's now a bustling community center with art galleries, performance spaces, a bar, a cafe. We no longer exclude lepers from our community. We treat them. We treat them with medication. We treat them with whatever. In a kind of reversal to how the leper colony originally worked, nowadays, if you are unvaccinated, meaning you're a potential spreader of an infectious disease, you are excluded from being able to enter Beit Hansen, which is exactly the flip to what it was originally for. According to halakha, according to Jewish law, it is not only permitted to get vaccinated, it is mandatory. And it's even permitted to get vaccinated on Shabbat if that's the only time a vaccine is available. The halakhic discussion surrounding vaccination is not from COVID. It goes back to the late 18th century, before true vaccines were developed. In those days, smallpox was an incredibly dangerous disease. An estimated 400,000 people died from smallpox every year in Europe alone. And the population of Europe was less than 1/3 of what it is today. In 1785, Rabbi Abraham Nanzig permitted the procedure of variolation. Variolation is a process where healthy people were deliberately infected with a very small amount of smallpox or cowpox in order to cause a mild form of the disease that would grant them immunity. There were very real risks to this treatment, since it used the actual disease. About 1 in 1,000 people would get a severe case and die. However, Rabbi Nanzig had lost 2 children to smallpox, and it was well known that the risks from the disease were far greater than the 1 in 1,000 risk from trying this sort of new vaccine. He considered a mitzvah to undergo the treatment. And when the vaccine did become available, Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz, who was a great scholar at the time, ruled it's permissible to get vaccinated even though it may lead to death. Why? Because you can expose yourself to something that rarely leads to danger in order to avoid a more likely danger. Regarding a different health issue, Rabbi Chida said that something that has 1 in 10,000 chance of happening is sufficiently rare that it counts to what is referred to as batla da'ato etzel kol adam, which means nullified in everyone's opinion and not given any attention. Now think about Canada for a second. Canada, sadly, has a fairly high rate of fatalities from COVID. Has approximately 2% current information. For every 1 million people who get COVID in Canada, 20,000 die. A study done in America on the first 23 million vaccinations given found no deaths that could be directly attributed to the vaccine, and no excess deaths in the population that had been vaccinated. There have been a few rare cases of what we call anaphylactic shock, a severe allergic reaction, which is why, for those of you who've had your shot already, you will know that you're required to wait 15 minutes in place after receiving the vaccine to make sure that you don't have such a reaction. And none of the people who have had the reaction died from it. With over 243 million people in the world now fully vaccinated, there is sufficient data to tell us that the vaccine does not present any danger to life. The vaccine will, however, clearly save millions. But the vaccine itself is not 100% effective. Even the best of the COVID vaccines is only about 95% effective, which means that a small number of vaccinated people can still get the disease. And even a smaller number will die from the disease, even though they do get vaccinated. Which is why getting vaccinated is not only permissible, it is halakhically mandatory, unless you have a medical reason that makes it inadvisable to get vaccinated. Inadvisable means not your opinion that it's inadvisable, but medical personnel's opinion that it's inadvisable. And it's why the Tav Yarok, the green passport system, such as has been introduced in Israel, is not only permissible, but it's very wise. Scientists tell us that it's safe for vaccinated people to get together. And they say that the odds of someone who has been vaccinated having COVID and spreading it to someone else who has also been vaccinated is astronomically small. But someone who is not vaccinated is much likelier to be infected, and that person could be more effective or could more effectively transmit the virus to one of that unlucky 5% for whom the vaccine does not provide protection. Once vaccines are widely available, there's nothing unfair about a society saying, we are going to reopen, but only for those who are vaccinated. People who choose not to get vaccinated continue to be a danger to themselves and to others. And just as the Torah put public health over individual convenience in excluding the leper from the camp, the same thing applies here. So, that being said, what about those rare people who, for medical reasons, can't get vaccinated? Isn't it unfair to keep them outside of the camp? They want to get vaccinated. It's not their fault. Perhaps they have some medical reason why they can't. Sadly, such people shouldn't be endangering their health by going into enclosed spaces with potentially infectious people during a pandemic. That's why everyone who can get vaccinated must get vaccinated. It's the only way we're going to get to what they call herd immunity, which will allow those people who can't get vaccinated to safely rejoin society again. Even if someone doesn't like the idea of a vaccine, or they are comfortable living with that risk. There are those people who have told me, you know what, Rabbi, it doesn't really affect me. I'm comfortable. I don't care what the risks are. They are obligated to get vaccinated because of our obligation to other people. We're not only commanded to keep ourselves healthy and safe, we are obligated to be concerned for the health of others. The Torah commands us, Al talmod al dam re'echa. Do not stand idly by your neighbor's blood. If we can help prevent danger to someone else, we're obligated to do so, even if it's inconvenient for us. Many leading halachic authorities say it's obligatory to get vaccinated. Rav Moshe Ehrenreich, Rav Yosef Kamel, Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, Rav Nachum Rabinovich, Rav Yisrael Rosen, these are great figures in today's world who wrote a joint letter where they said, if the vast majority of the physicians of the world and in Israel state unequivocally that one must vaccinate, this becomes binding halakha. This becomes Jewish law. We always defer to our medical professionals when it comes to protecting life. And like any halakha, and perhaps even more so, because it is known that we act more stringently with dangers than with prohibitions. Rabbi Mordechai Halperin went one stage further and said that someone who refuses a vaccination, who is able to have it during an epidemic, could be classed as a rotzeach begramo. A rotzeach begramo is an indirect killer. A mazik, someone who causes damage to others from a non-fatal case of COVID. We've been through a very difficult year. The situation in Israel shows us what a post-COVID future could be like, but only if we all get vaccinated. Hardcore anti-vaxxers will probably never listen to reason. But if you know anyone hesitating, and I've spoken to many people who are hesitating, those who are hesitating to get the vaccine, maybe they're scared, maybe they have all sorts of preconceived ideas. Please encourage them to get vaccinated. If not to protect themselves, to protect others, especially those who for medical reasons either can't get vaccinated or for whom the vaccine is potentially ineffective. Someone I know who had a heart transplant got vaccinated. 2 weeks after the second shot, her system shows no antibodies because the drugs that she takes to avoid having her body reject the heart counters the creation of the antibodies. The only way people like her can be protected is if everyone stops thinking about themselves so much and gets vaccinated. Shabbat shalom.